Welcome and thank you all for joining us for this video accompaniment to the BALLE 101 Toolkit, which is BALLE's compilation of resources for localists looking to catalyze local economy action in their communities. The full toolkit is located at the BALLE website, www.bealocalist.org, and has a comprehensive collection of materials and resources to help you start and advance your work. Capital networks are the local economy ecosystem model that this video will be exploring. We are fortunate to have Don McGee, the CEO of Goodworks Ventures, as our moderator for this conversation. Don, take it away.
Sure, thank you, Andrew. I think before we start into in-depth questions, I think that all of us do this because we have a unique and incredibly deep love of place. We're place-based and we work in the place we call home. And I would just like to ask Jessica and Matt. Jessica is the founder and director of, the name of your organization is Emerging ChangeMakers.
Emerging ChangeMakers Network, yeah.
Thank you.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. I'm just like, I tried to memorize it 6 times before we got started.
You're very kind for trying.
And Matt Raker is the Director of Community Investment and Impact from Mountain BizWorks. Can you, Jessica, kick us off and tell us what you love about the place where you do your work?
So I'm based in Alabama, in Mobile, right along the Gulf Coast. And, you know, my work really centers around the intersection between emerging ideas, emerging leaders, and really appreciating culture of a particular place and how we use culture, how we support it and honor that culture as a way of thinking about how we build this local economy, right? So if we're talking about what it means to take care of home, to build a really strong and resilient home, then what becomes really incredible is to look at the people in place and how folks naturally already do things, and then build in systems and ways of relationship and being that supports that kind of thing. So that's what I love about the South. And I do a lot of work with Black folks because I'm Black, and so I like that, and I like the history and relationship and community and culture that is infused in the South. So yeah, that's home.
Thanks. I love that brief overview. How about you, Matt? What have you got for home?
Oh, I live and work.
I can't hear anybody.
In Asheville. Is my audio coming through okay?
It is.
Great. Yeah. So I live and work in Asheville and the whole Appalachian Mountains region of North Carolina. It's mountains and dominated by small mountain towns and a lot of rural mountain landscapes in between there. And it's a region that's kind of going through this big economic transition from what was extractive industries, and then there was some sort of large traditional industries around low-skilled manufacturing and furniture and textiles, tobacco. Those have all pretty much evaporated out of the region. So there's this great emergence of a local, thriving, entrepreneurial, small business-driven economy that also still really builds on the kind of long-term Appalachian cultures and heritage. It's just a fascinating place and a great place to work and call home.
Well, I love what you said about your place, Matt, because it's very similar to mine. We also came from a sort of post-colonial extraction-based place. Montana, for those of you who don't know, is the 4th largest state in the country and one of the least populated. It has a population about the size of the city of Oakland in a geographic landmass about as big as California. So that means we have big, wide open space, lots of distance in between our people. But what I can say I love about my place on this February morning where we're doing this recording is that we just got 6 inches of new powder. And if I wasn't on this call, I'd probably be out going and grabbing the skis for a powder day. We are big sky country, and I love what that is. So I think that maybe, Andrew, if you can pop my slides up, I'll run through my place-based, and then we can have Jessica run through hers, and then Matt run through his, and then sort of take the conversation from there. Great. I'm trying to moderate and do other things, so if I sound like a little bit spaced out, you guys, that's what's going on. Let me talk about the last place-based investing in Montana. I have the great fortune of working with a second-generation inheritor of wealth from Champion Spark Plugs who decided she wanted to spend the rest of her resources during her lifetime in the place that she knew to call home and that she loved deeply. And to that end, we have a foundation and an investment capital fund where we've set it up in Montana. Can you advance the next slide, Andrew? So we've been doing this work about 9 years now, which is absolutely extraordinary to me that time can go by so fast. I say to people sometimes, that's like 2 colleges plus a year. Oh my gosh, like, wow. We really tried to be intentional and focused about the work that we were doing and put our stake in the ground to take the risks that no one else was willing to do in our capital ecosystem. We invest in companies that are not bankable. We do a lot of infrastructure and capacity building with both for-profit and a nonprofit. And we've really focused on trying to build an entire ecosystem where if we put leverage into one piece, it starts to feed off the next piece. And the slide you're looking at right now, it just kind of highlights some of the things that we've really focused on. As we've transitioned from a post-extraction economy, we've really moved into trying to encourage intellectual capital and brain power. And to that end, we've invested in Startup Weekends, sponsoring the Hellgate Venture Network, which is a community of entrepreneurs, investing money into our CDC so we can loan out across the state to companies that we might not otherwise come in contact. One of our biggest successes is the Western Montana Growers Co-op, and I think, Jessica, you're going to talk a little bit about food too, but as we relocalize our economy, and as we think about businesses that can thrive and expand in our world, rebuilding the infrastructure for things like agricultural distribution has been really a great success that we've done with very little money. For example, the Western Montana Growers Co-op was started on our farm, and with the investment of buying a truck for the Western Montana Growers Co-op, which is a cooperative of farmers in the western slope of Montana, it's now grown to be about a $2 million business over the course of about the last 8 years. So just sort of shows you what a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of money can catalyze in your community. Can you go on to the next slide, please, Andrew? Just the sort of thumbnail of things that we have learned is that just because I work with somebody who's inherited wealth doesn't mean you have to have that kind of money or resources to make change in your own community. In fact, I would contend that some of our most successful things that we've done have required very little cash or no cash at all. We've connected people, we've connected the dots, we provide capacity building and mentorship to people who had bright ideas. We've put little bits of money into things like Startup Weekend, where you can catalyze a whole team of 100 people who have bright ideas and want to see their dreams come true. So I think that it's possible to do things on a large scale with lesser money and just a little bit of elbow grease ingenuity. But one thing I can really, really emphasize is our network capacity, because we are such a large state, sort of being inclusive and making sure that people who are across the state are enrolled in helping each other do the best that we can do has really helped a lot. And we call Montana sometimes the biggest small town or the state with the longest main street in the United States. So that's what we are. How about the next slide, please, Andrew? Go on to the next slide. I think that one's self-explanatory. The next slide, I think, is for me is that it takes time. You know, I think we were rather impatient once we started with our work. We're like, wow, okay, we're up, we're going. This thing's going to happen. And I will say it's a shock to me that we've been at it as long as we have, but it's also been really rewarding to see the fruition of work. But I would say the seeds planted were not for annual crops. They were for perennial crops, maybe even trees. It's taken a long time for a lot of the seeds that we planted to actually grow and sprout and be nourished and actually get to, you know, the 30-yard line, maybe down to the 10-yard line. I don't think we're home yet, but I think we've created an amazing place in the state of Montana, and we're hoping to make it a better place for the next 20 years. So Jessica, why don't we pop you up and have you talk about the work that you're doing?
Sure. Okay. Is the slide up?
Not yet. Andrew, how about the slides? We got Jessica.
I'm here.
There we go.
So, well, while we're getting going, perfect. Oh, that says April. Okay, well, that one. So I started this organization, Emerging ChangeMakers Network, and as I said, we're based in Alabama. The really central part of things for us was to be a linkage between emergent ideas and emergent thought leaders in the area as a way of addressing economic inequality in the South. The next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of what's happening in Alabama specifically, you know, and particularly when it comes to a question around inequality of resources, of capital, when we look at the median income in Alabama, we've got 50% lower for Blacks and whites. And we also have heard a lot about this wealth gap. And this is around the country, obviously. But respectively, we have about $141,000 in assets, things that people can typically liquidate. A lot of that, some of it is put away and even equity in their own companies or different things. And then about $11,000 for African Americans. And while some people say, oh, it's not that much, one, I beg to differ, but in aggregate, it becomes quite a bit. And specifically, when you're thinking about entrepreneurship and how difficult it is to get seed stage or risk capital, and people say, well, you should get it from your friends and family. And you're like, well, my friends and family got $11,000, so I don't know. So we have a lot of businesses that start off very undercapitalized and end up you know, never really getting the kind of nurture that they really could have. And then when we look at CDFIs, which usually step in and fill some of these gaps, the CDFIs seen in Alabama are mostly depository institutions and are not necessarily doing some of the riskier kinds of loans, but because they're in a particular demographic or they serve a certain footprint, they do meet criteria of a CDFI. But when you look at it in relation between Alabama, Mississippi, and some other areas in the South, and you look at the kinds of grants and things from the CDFI fund that went to Massachusetts or other states like that, you can see even in accessing dollars out of Treasury for these kinds of activities, we're also really aggressively under-resourced. And so that's the landscape where we operate, and certainly I think further exacerbated by a culture that has very intentionally removed African American people from being able to take advantage of the full economic system in the state. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of our people in our place. We've traveled around the country learning more about what's the right kind of system for us. We went up to Maine and hung out with some great folks there and learned about Coastal Enterprise, which is a picture in the middle. And in the picture below, we created a investment club of African American folks who they're based in Birmingham. This is the executive team of that investment club. And they are, or we are, part of Slow Money. So we're very much part of like a food sort of movement, and took a model that they use in other clubs, also in Maine, and put that into our club in Birmingham. And the picture where the two women are standing out in front of a house there, we did a loan for some farmers who did not have any, they didn't have like a grocery store or other areas, live in a pretty rural area. And so they ended up helping them to get this particular building. They take all of their excess produce and sell it there. They also sell uniforms and other things that you have to travel miles and miles away to go get. And so this was the first day that they were showing me around to something that we helped them to get. And in this last picture, which is a picture of a group of folks sitting at the table. That's actually a group of farmers. And there's one farmer in there who, not going to point out completely, but he's in the picture. And he told me this story. His name is Mr. Robert. And Mr. Robert had always wanted to work the land or whatever. And he's an older gentleman. He's in his 80s and really like tough, like, hardworking tough. And so at one point he said to me, I asked him, why is it so difficult for me to get you guys some money? Like, this is really hard. This is a lot of work. And he said, he told me a story about when the land that he lived on, he was a sharecropper in his younger years, and the man who owned that particular piece of land had passed away. And his children didn't want to keep working the land, and so he had gone and made an arrangement with the children and said, I think if I do some odd and end kind of jobs and still work this particular plot that I've been working, I could make payments and own the piece that I live on. And the kids agreed. They said, okay, fine. They said, go to the next county over and talk with a banker friend of ours, and he'll set you up with the necessary paperwork. So he did that and talked with his banker and set up, some arrangements. And for about 15 years or so, he made these monthly payments for this particular piece of land. And at the last time of his payment, he used to keep a little journal at his home. The last payment, he asked for what he called ownership papers. And the man said, come back again another day. And he came back. And he kept coming back, and there were no ownership papers. He had been paying on this land, and they never recorded that. They never intended to give him anything. And so a level of distrust of financial systems, this is a very real thing that people still very wary in relationship to. And the larger question for us is really around, how do we breathe into or speak into a culture that has these kinds of stories infused in it, instead of just going and saying, oh, well, they're not investment ready, or their businesses fail, or all of these other sort of narratives that we'll put on folks. How do we really dig in and deal with the inequity of the way that our financial system and our local economics have completely excluded a population of people and turn very intentionally only into consumers or into just workforce, but not into owners. So that's really what our work is about. The next slide, please. So we did a lot of work in Alabama around food, although my thinking is it really is about the culture and the conditions in which we place capital and why. But we've worked in the entire food system. As I mentioned, you saw a lot of farmers that I showed you in the pictures, from the growers, the production side, all the way to retail or the consumption side. We did a lot of work on the consumption or retail side around bringing healthy food finding to the state, and really understanding along that particular value chain where relationships were really fragmented and where infusions of capital and what types of capital would have made a difference, so that people who are growing in those rural communities and places where they're vulnerable along the way wouldn't just be extractive, but it would be a support of the places where the food is actually being grown, and the places where people really do need food, instead of just growing and things are leaving and never creating this sort of relationship or false dichotomy that there isn't enough when we do have enough. And so I'm more of a catalyst, and our organization serves more as a catalyst to try to get CDFIs, to try to get institutions to really be thinking about these questions, and to help them to see the bigger picture and to dig a lot deeper than just making a product and then throwing your hands up because you don't understand why nobody wants to use that product, but really taking some time to slow it down and understand the underpinnings of all of those things. So that's me.
Wow, thanks, Jessica. Great lay of the landscape.
Yeah.
Matt, would you like to talk to us about the work you're doing in North Carolina?
Sure. Be glad to give a little background on that. So as Andrew is pulling up our slides, again, my name's Matt Raker. I'm the Director of Community Investments and Impact at Mountain BizWorks. Mountain BizWorks is an organization that got its start about 25 years ago as a micro enterprise development organization. This was back, where our hometown is Asheville, North Carolina. And if you've ever been here, you might not believe this, but 25 years ago, most of downtown Asheville was boarded up, was vacant. There was very little going on. And this was also right, at the late 80s, early 90s, right when through globalization and other things, we were really starting to lose a lot of our furniture and textiles industry across the region. So which ended up being about 60% of our base manufacturing jobs in the region. So there wasn't much, there was very little happening downtown. And then there was also this huge kind of economic, tragedy happening all across the region as well. So the founders of what was then called the Mountain Micro Enterprise Fund got together and said, we've got great potential here in the Asheville area. We've got a lot of creative people, a strong community, and we think by banding together, we can really help get some micro enterprises going and reinvigorate the community. So it started with a group of peers doing peer-to-peer business trainings and support to each other, and had a small lending circle that they would lend each other, help get their businesses off the ground together. And then, very quickly they started getting some real, it became a catalyst for the whole downtown and really got a revitalization going. Also from the beginning, looked at micro enterprise development as not just a means of community revitalization, but also a way to help create wealth in a lot of our long-term poverty and underserved communities, which across the Appalachian Mountains is very persistent, and it ranges from just our rural communities to as well underserved markets like minorities and women and veterans today as well in our region. So over 25 years, the organization has grown up with a lot of our clients. We still, the micro enterprises is still kind of the core of what we are, but 20 years ago or so, the organization became a CDFI, which is a Community Development Financial Institution, Jessica referenced, and raised some initial capital from local investors. And then has gone on to leverage that and get, we have investment now from foundations, from banks, public agencies, as well as our local investor pool. And we've gone, Andrew, you can go to the next slide. I've gotten ahead of us a little bit. Well, you can go, yeah, we did that one. One more slide, please. Well, there's the region. You can see, if you're not familiar, Asheville's right in the middle, and we serve all the green area, which is the mountains region of North Carolina. So next slide, please. So now we've gone from being the sort of just micro enterprise development to now we're kind of a full service CDFI, really cultivating small business entrepreneurial development across the Western North Carolina region. And we do about $2 million in lending a year right now, and that's up to $200,000, but our average loan is still around $20,000. So we're still very much focused on micro enterprise and small business. And we've got in addition to doing finance, we've found that finance is a great way to help achieve impact. But just as important to us, and kind of from our roots, is continuing to have that real strong peer-to-peer coaching and technical assistance that helps folks be more successful. And we've got a kind of a pretty good, robust set of programs now from the business planning stage all the way to early growth that we can help companies really develop and mature and become major contributors in our economy. So that's kind of the basis of what we do. And then last year we also added on And we might have some time to talk about an innovation fund, which kind of gets to a little bit more of what Dawn does, which allows us to provide some financing to some higher growth, more craft manufacturing and tech-oriented companies that aren't just serving local markets, but are serving kind of global and national markets. And that's a growing area of our economy and of our interest, and that allows us to take a little bit higher risk. And so that's what we're doing at Mountain BizWorks.
Awesome. So I think I'd like to start with the beginning at the beginning. And I know, Matt, you weren't around 25 years ago. But
I was, just not here.
Just not there, right. To the extent that you know any organizational history, like in terms of who started with how much money and what was the first thing that actually happened? I'm trying to gear this conversation a little bit towards, I'm sitting in my community, which may be rural and isolated someplace in the United States, and trying to figure out, how do I even begin this process of investing and leveraging capital in my community? So what would you say to somebody who says, where do I start and how do I start?
So yeah, the organization started really as a micro enterprise development organization, inspired by microfinance movement of the Grameen Bank and folks like that. And it started with a peer group of entrepreneurs that got together, that started doing peer-to-peer coaching themselves, as well as created just a small loan kind of lending circle just among themselves to help get some capital going and get a couple businesses started. And then from there, they were able to get some successes, and then an important philanthropist in our state, Julian Price, provided some seed money to help the organization actually get organized, get some legs around it, and then become, kind of start to build out its fund and attract more local investors.
Do you remember how much that initial grant was?
Gosh, I wish I did. I don't know.
Okay. Great. How about you, Jessica? Where would you say to begin, or how to begin, or what steps to take if you're thinking about doing that at home?
Yeah, I would say from the research place is probably where I would start, of really understanding what's already existing within the landscape, and what's the hypothesis that you're working with right now? Is it just that folks aren't able to connect right now, or is the kind of money that you need not there? I think that's where a lot of good research in the beginning starts. I'm a big fan of incubating ideas within another institution. I don't really like the idea of starting a whole bunch of new stuff unless it really, really has, been teased out to where it makes a lot of sense. And so sometimes I think if you've got an institution that might already be up and running, but, like a business sort of incubator or other kind of, group like that, there may be a natural step to be thinking about some of these questions, or any other sort of group that's looking at different sort of economic indicators. Or one group that we worked with in Huntsville was very focused on housing and was looking at issues around how they could do refinancing some of their projects differently, which then moved them into thinking about where the CDFI sort of demand was pent up, and a lot of other questions came up out of that. So I would just sort of say assessing the landscape, and we started very much with a grant that was focused on doing just that. And sometimes getting those kind of grants are a little bit easier to start with, to just look at the landscape and lay it out, and then come away with some ideas of what you think may be next. So I would say that's probably where I would lean to start.
And I'll add to what I was saying. So 25 years ago, micro enterprise development in the U.S. and CDFIs were kind of a concept. Today it's much more of an established field, and there's dedicated funding sources for helping new CDFIs get off the ground, and revolving loan funds and those kinds of things. So there's, fortunately for folks that are now trying to start these, there's pretty good support to help folks through that process, and a lot of models to help get going.
Yeah, I would second what both of you guys said in the sense of taking the inventory of the place where you are and knowing what resources and assets you have within your community, and then really deciding to pinpoint where you want to start your work and what kind of leverage you're trying to apply to where and to what end. I love you referenced the peer-to-peer group, and if any of y'all have not been to Asheville, I have, and oh my gosh, I can't even believe your downtown was boarded up like that. Like, that's crazy. It's one of the most vibrant downtowns I've ever been in, so good work. The thing about it though is, like, in terms of housing your institution, if you can get a round table of people together who are able to mentor and build capacity with each other, then any kind of funder looking into that is going to say, wow, there's some collaboration going on, which funders really like to see. And that there's what I would call a demitigation of risk. If you have more than one brain applied to the problem, you've got multiple brains sitting around trying to help each other, then that's great. And in terms of being both a capacity building and perhaps a lending source, there's a town in Vermont that the book has been written about called The Town That Food Saved. And it really was started as a sort of community enterprise where there were a bunch of small businesses that got together, just like Matt said, and worked in loaning people money when the cycle was off. So if the farmer needed money for planting and was able to loan somebody else money in the fall, it was really the town that food saved. And it's about Hardwick, Vermont, and it's a really interesting story if anyone's interested. Jessica, I was struck in your presentation by the huge sort of, like, what I would call institutional infrastructure problems which you have. I mean, I'm just shocked at the level of theft and, outright taking that was going on, and the lack of CDFI funding coming into your world. How do you begin to approach, like, where it seems like the system is stacked against you?
Yeah.
How do you even think about going into a place of leverage there?
It's a real challenge because there are multiple places where there are failures, as you're noting, and it also means that there are multiple opportunities, but there's a lot of education. Person can hold or one institution can hold. You need multiple folks to that. And, I think part of what my job really is, in a lot of ways, is to highlight where the inequity is and to be talking to folks outside of the state who ordinarily would say, not Alabama, that's not where innovation comes from, or we can't figure out how to get in, or the infrastructure isn't there for us to even put our capital into that area, to really get them to sit at a table and say, okay, this may be true, but what else can we do? Is there a CDFI that would want to partner and work in this area, already has a charter to work in this area, if that's the right way to go? Can we switch some of the underwriting criteria, or look at revamping underwriting criteria so that we can get a different swath of people in? The CDFIs that are already operating, are there some things that we can do that we can add in that would bring more people in around this sort of peer-to-peer lending and, and build off of this institutional brand that folks have and reestablish a relationship around those brands? Those are the kinds of questions that you have to have folks like myself asking for those kinds of things. But ultimately, I think that there is a reality that we have to face in the South, in particular, that I've noticed around when we talk about wealth building, when we talk about food access, when we talk about education, when we talk about any of these things, that there is a historical piece around inequity. And the thing is, it's not that old of a history, right? So we're only 50 years. I'm closer to 50. I'm looking good, but I'm closer to 50 than not. But we're only 50 years from the civil rights. We're only from a moment when you had Jim Crow, which created what we call economic detour, right? Where basically you excluded people from being able to fully participate in the full economy. So you can't necessarily expect in 50 years for those levels of distrust, for the institutions to even line back up. It doesn't work that way. So what we're dealing with here is a lot more of unraveling a lot of structural and institutional racism, as well as trying to set up and establish thriving community and entrepreneurs and give them an opportunity to build a legacy for their family, just like anybody else does. So we're fighting on a lot of different fronts with that.
Yeah, I cannot even imagine. I mean, we have definitely infrastructure problems, particularly on our reservations. We have 6 sovereign nations within the state of Montana, which are as economically desolate and deinstitutionalized as anything that's in the South, and often the comparison is drawn. So I totally respect you for the work you're doing and deep empathy for how difficult the challenges are. But one of the things that we're all doing is trying to move capital into our communities. And one of the ways you do that is to demitigate risk, right? You're trying to take the risk out so the capital can come in. What are some of the things that you've thought about or done that you found that are successful, or even failures, since we all learn really well from failure, that you've experienced with respect to that?
Yeah. 2 things. One, getting in a lot of different partners, right? If we're talking about sort of different capital stacks, but really different partners who are invested along the process, really helps to spread that risk and manage it, and for everybody to sort of see a bigger picture than what maybe one group would be able to carry on their own. Taking the time to know on the side of who you're lending to, and for them to really know you, to be able to add in all of the technical supports, and for us as a group to also be getting technical support, right? Like, it's not one of those things where the onus of responsibility for technical support only is for the borrower or whoever, but it really is us as an institution has to grow and mature and pay attention to what's moving and talk to our partners in other places and learn from them. So I think really good partnerships, really deep relationships, and making sure that everybody is responsible for learning and continual engagement, I think helps a lot around the question of risk.
Thanks. How about you, Matt? You've got any strategy for loan loss, or how you evaluate your investments to try to protect on the downside?
Yeah, well, I think fundamental, as Jessica was saying, for us is this combination of lending and technical assistance that's really important, of helping the entrepreneur, making sure they've got the basic business plan in place, as well as so that's up front, as well as we're very active in kind of one-on-one coaching after a loan as well. And we use a peer network of other successful business owners in the community, so that it's like really respected, relevant advice that they're getting from folks they know have gone through the exact same thing.
And how often does that meet? Like if I was in one of those peer groups, how often would I be meeting with my peers?
Well, the business planning is done in a peer-to-peer one, and it's over like 6 weeks. So it's kind of a focused thing, and then you've got your plan, and then off you go. The one-on-one peer-to-peer coaching is on an as-needed basis, really. So whenever it's available, whenever folks need it, have a pressing issue or question. For new loan clients, we try to have them engaged at least until we see them really executing and getting where they need to be going. Early on, to have kind of, a set number of hours that we say we're going to try to utilize this over the next 3 to 6 months, whatever, within the program, so that we try to stay in touch with them until we see things are going smoothly, and they may not need it as much, thereafter. So sorry, do you have a question on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so for folks who are curious, like since it's a peer-to-peer network that seems to be doing the bulk of the things, how big is your staff? What is your internal staff size, and how many people do you guys have working on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, we're a relatively small CDFI, in terms of the way that it goes, kind of nationally. We've got about 10 staff, and that's broken down. We've got basically 3 on the lending side of the house, 3 on the kind of training and technical assistance programs, and and then the other administrative kind of folks, executive director and so forth. So relatively small team. Then we've got 25 peer-to-peer coaches, roughly at any given time that are active in that program. So that's kind of our team.
Both you and Jessica mentioned CDFIs, and so for those people who are not familiar with it, is CDFI funding entirely dependent upon federal allocation?
It's not. The designation to become a CDFI, it's a U.S. Treasury certified designation, and U.S. Treasury has an entity called the CDFI Fund, which is a major funder of CDFIs, both startup and existing CDFIs across the country. We've received that in the past, but we haven't, in several years. So it's not necessarily an ongoing funding source for CDFIs. And then, we started with local investors, kind of initially capitalized us. So we've got a local investor program, and I can talk more about what that looks like. And then we've got funding from SBA, USDA, which are federal agencies that we're an intermediary lender for. From banks, that are required, or that either, are interested in the economic development mission or have to meet CRA requirements, and they can do that partially through working with CDFIs. And then foundations and churches and just other institutions, municipalities, all can invest through us to help meet some of their goals and objectives.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if you're talking about start talking a little bit about your new program, in the sense that, like, I'm imagining people who are listening to this are thinking about launching a program. So how do you entice local investors to decide to participate? What are the challenges and obstacles about starting any kind of new program, and how's it going?
Right. So, I think Jessica was bring partnerships is really important. To engage, understand where the gaps are in your community, engage partnerships as much as you can. And so, for example, we're doing this right now in a couple areas. We're looking to move into, serve in a deeper way, bring more capital to part of our mountain region that has been underserved, continue to be underserved by any kind of small business investing in CDFIs. So we're working very closely with the business, existing business folks. We've done, a handful of loans up there. So working with them through that network, through the economic development networks, through community groups, just to help really understand the landscape, get support, and they can understand what their priorities are, and then can help us then raise funds, either local funds from local municipalities, local funders and family foundations or community foundations, as well as to leverage funds from existing CDFI funders, whether it's a CDFI fund or other CDFI funders around the country. So that's all important. I think there's right now the landscape for and the need for CDFIs and other CDFI type lenders. There's others that operate in the space that aren't necessarily certified in CDFIs, but is huge because banks continue to move further and further upstream and are doing less small business lending. So there's more and more need in this area. So there's a very compelling case to make.
Yeah, I think there's also a very compelling case to be made for more and more people who are finally deciding that they would like to figure out a way to put their money to work at home. And I think CDFIs are one mechanism where investors can invest in their local community.
Right.
So you guys have both been working on the ground for some time now and investing and building capacity in various organizations. Would you say that there's like a sweet spot or an easier place or a place where like maybe there's low-hanging fruit in terms of either industry or types of businesses?
A sweet spot. I want to find it. I don't know if I know. Can we get some feedback in from this and tell me what's fine? You know what? I will say this. I think that there is an incredible moment right now that's happening. I don't know if people sort of feel the energy where a conversation is probably greater than I've heard it in some time, and the demand for it keeps growing and growing. And I think that is makes a lot of opportunity, you know, more possible. But I think you do have to merge that with having people in your community that have enough resources to already help capitalize something that you're going to do. Like, I don't want to over romanticize it. If you're in a rural area and there aren't a lot of folks who have, you know, that kind of money, they're going to capitalize anything, really, right? If you have a history of institutions that historically disenfranchise folks, even if they're required by their CRA, you may or may not even be in the loop to know what their CRA rating is and how to apply pressure. There's a lot of mechanics to being able to capture all that. So I don't want to over romanticize it, and at the same time, I don't you know, throw a wet blanket on it either. I want folks to be able to really take a good assessment of where they really are and what is possible and what assets they have, because in no one place fits. And that's why I'm saying, like, if I could find a magic bullet or the sweet spot in this, I'd love it. But what I mostly notice is that what may be possible in Asheville because of retirement community, because of other things or whatever, because of history, that may not happen in Wilcox County, Alabama, in the Black Belt. That may not be possible. But there may be other things that might be possible in that, you know, more rural community, or maybe more appropriately, Mobile and Asheville might be a little more similar in measurement. So you take inventory to what you have there, and you make some decisions. I am, as I said, I'm not one who enjoys building something new just for the sake of building something new. I really do believe that if there are partners that are there and you can make the case of why moving into an area or taking on another piece of work that they hadn't taken on to be good for their business, if you will, then I try that. And unless that doesn't work, then I probably go into, okay, you know, we've got to take this on ourselves. So, you know, we're in a different position than that. But I'm looking for the sweet spot too. What you know, Dawn? What do y'all know?
Well, you know, I was curious. Like, I love that picture of the ladies who started the store with their farm and like even selling uniforms and stuff like that. Because when you think that money is going to be spent for those either food or uniforms, which are pretty basic, and it's either going to leave that community or it's going to stay. Yeah. And I love the fact that there was, you know, that you facilitated that to be able to, the money could stay in the community. And so to the extent those dollars stay in the community, then maybe they can support the local bakery or the local something. Mm-hmm. So it is about keeping money within the community, but it's tremendously difficult to attract capital to these really rural, under-resourced areas. And so for me, my local sweet spot on that is start with food, because people eat. And people are going to spend what money they have to eat. And if you can provide some local food and, you know, starting with those things. And we've really spent a lot of money building infrastructure to relocalize our agricultural community so that we now have cheese makers and farmers markets and things that like we take for granted in a sort of urban economy. But those things didn't exist in my community about 15 years ago. They just didn't.
Yeah.
So that's one place we found.
Yeah. And I think I like food because it's something that everybody can really get behind and really understand. Like, it's one of those things where nobody fights me on food. Like, I want to, you know, like, oh, here she comes talking about racial inequity, but I'm talking about food. And they're like, okay, all right, cool. So it does build more bridges than anything, which I really love. And ultimately that's what we want. And it's a way where there's a lot of, we can piggyback on a lot of things that are happening around the country that are really shifting the mindset and the culture around it without having to spend a lot of money educating people on why local or whatever is better. I'm able to build off of that. So I do think food is an incredible way to connect, you know, a little bit. Sure.
You broke up a little bit, Jessica, so I just want to recap, which is that I think you said food is an incredible way to connect your community. So
that's what I said. It probably in a really verbose, long-winded way.
No, it just was very slow-mo in terms of like the internet connection. How about you, Matt? You got any low-hanging fruit you'd like to comment on?
Y'all are nailing it. This is great. I'm taking notes. But I think find out what the local passion is in the community. Because you're going to want to support things that the community really wants and serving community need, and that also will help you if you're going to be raising resources from the community or helping get loan capital or investment from the community. You want it to be things that really resonate to the interest of who those funders are going to be. So local foods is huge across our region. It'd be small town revitalization. Is also really key. Like a lot of these, our small mountain towns, really, they want another restaurant in their community, and it's similar to the food thing, And we also like restaurants. Probably, we love farms too, but farms are hard to lend to for us.
Yes,
they're a lot easier. That's a whole nother conversation. But if they're interested and the community's going to come out and support it, those are great. For us also, you want to be coordinated too. If the town is also coming in and doing streetscape improvements or, doing broadband or other things like that, if you can layer on top of these other improvements that are happening, that's huge for mitigating risk. I love that concept, Don, that way of thinking about it. And then also starting small. A lot of times we'll have an entrepreneur that comes in and says, I need this much, and we try to say, all right, let's think about how we can make it a little bit smaller so it's a little bit more manageable for both of us. And then we can step up to a larger number if that makes sense later. So starting small and then making sure that you get enough so that you're spreading your own risk around in kind of a portfolio. That's important too, that you get enough activity going that you can manage in, if you do have losses.
Yeah. So, I think that like anyone listening to this has figured out like all the work that we're doing, this is not easy stuff. Like it's really not easy stuff. And I think the good news is like anything you do is a success, whether it wins or not. Like you're moving the ball someplace in your community and trying to make change. And that is just to be commended in and of itself. But for people who are thinking like, well, what are some things that if you know now you wouldn't have done, or that you wish you had known before you started, or that kind of advice?
Yeah. We started. We wanted to do some peer-to-peer lending, which was like really cool, and it seemed like there was a lot of interest and a lot of people asked for it and things like that. And so, but we didn't really dig. At that point, I was more interested in the product and the function than I was really in the stories and the healing and the
Jessica, we've lost you again. So we just got
do it. There were a lot of ways to learn. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. So we just got that you had started the product and you didn't know, but you weren't as interested in the stories and the healing. Can you pick back up at that part?
We started a peer-to-peer lending group, and people really said they were interested in that. And but once it got time to really like start to put the money in and circle back around and all of the different things, what we missed was we didn't take the time to do the healing work. We didn't take the time to do the cultural relevancy work. We just were very much looking at the mechanisms and making sure that legally we were compliant and this was right and all of these different things. But we missed something that was really integral as to why people were doing it and what it meant to have deeper relationships. And so we had to roll everything back and slow it down and start over with just planting those seeds and doing that work. And I think it might have been sped along if we had other institutions in there that also borrowing another institution's credibility is also great. So if you're starting off and you don't have a lot, but your community foundation or there's a person who is well respected or whatever signs on, you can also leverage that credibility to help some of this. But you do have to go back and do some of that work, particularly when you're working with marginalized communities, and talk about what are some of the money secrets, what are some of the shame, what are some of the places where we have frustration, what are the things that might be blocking us from really pursuing this. And that was stuff that we didn't do in the beginning. And I consider that great learning of my own work, but it also tanked, you know, and it's hard when you're doing with something like bombs and everybody's like, oh, we knew it was gonna mess up, you know, and so it was hard to go back and say, okay, that didn't work, but stick with me, let's try this, but we had to do that. So that was us.
I would say, Dawn, you know, if you're getting started in this, be prepared for some bumps in the road. You know, there's awesome potential, but there's also going to be awesome challenges with it. The dear souls that put together this organization, you know, they're getting started. They raised their first sort of peer-to-peer loan capital, made their first loan. First one, the guy took the money and ran.
Oh my God.
Left town, boom, lost the first loan, you know, but they're thinking, this is great. Oh, now he just ran and took the money and run. So,
well, it can't get any worse than that. Well, maybe it could, but.
Exactly. So, like, well, maybe we should add some underwriting criteria.
Yeah.
But you got to be persistent, and thank goodness they were. But you know, that's going to be there. And just another thing, like we've had some problems where we've raised money, and that was on a certain amount of timeline to get deployed, and we needed longer to deploy it, and so we should have, you know, just with your funders, try to get as long as you can on the amount of time that you have to get the capital out there and work it, because sometimes it'll take longer than you think to find enough projects to fund.
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, communicate with your funders early and often. Like, you're going to have failure, and failures are going to also be pretty massive, but that's nothing to be afraid of. It's like, wow, you learn from them and you go, and like amazing things result and relationships can be built. But I think staying clean in your own money story, knowing where your own personal challenges are around money. I was dealing with a loan once where I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out why I was having difficulty with the entrepreneur, and even having a candid conversation about what was happening and how to fix it and how to make it better. And the person who I really respected, who's been working in this arena, said, you know, what was your money story when you were in eighth grade? Like when you're around 14, what was the money story that was happening in your own family household? And I really went back and took a look at that for myself and did some work around, well, my mom would write a check at the grocery store and secrete, like, you know, some money away so she can have some money that dad didn't know about on our little family budget. And I'm like, is that what's going on in this place? My looking at my own money story, I can't even tell you why, but it transformed the relationship with that particular borrower. So I think staying clean about where your own energy is with the money that's going in and out through you, and really communicating on both ends, where one of my number one core values is mess up, fess up. I expect both my team to fail and my loans to fail. That doesn't mean that I hope for that in the long run. I hope we can like take the failure and then make it into something good. But the one thing I really have no tolerance for with people I'm working with is to try to have something swept under the rug. I would rather know, because if it sees the light of day, there's a chance of fixing the problem. And if there isn't, there isn't. So that's the one thing that I would suggest people make sure that their team and that they bring is that they do their personal work around money, and that there's really clear communication around what's actually happening on the ground. So I can't believe how fast this hour has gone by. Like, we didn't get to half of the questions that are on the list over here that I'm looking at. Is there like anything else that you guys would just sort of like to add to the conversation? Closing notes, things that you learned, where people might look, how to start this great adventure they might be on?
I think a lot of good things have been said. I would definitely encourage people to, if you've identified some funders, ask them to help introduce you to folks who are working in this field, or if you just want to send an email and say, hey, is there a way that we can take a little bit of your time, consult with you a little bit and learn a little bit more about what you're doing. But finding an organization or a group of folks that you think are kind of doing something that you like, I think is a really helpful starting place. And, in this field, I would say this has probably been the most generous group of people who've shared, underwriting criteria, who have been like, hey, you got to be at this meeting, or let me introduce you to a funder who's interested in Alabama, but they need, they want to know something. It's been really generous. And so I would say, identify who those folks might be. Obviously, BALLE is a great place, to network and really figure out, like, what's the benchmark, what's the place, what's the organization that models what it is that you think you'd like to be, and then go in and unpack that. And maybe you'll find that you want to be that, maybe you don't. But it certainly gives you a lot of really great information and can help you don't bump your head when everybody else already has. Like, if they've already done it, learn from them and use that to your best advantage.
That's great, Jessica. Thanks. Appreciate that. Matt, you got closing thoughts?
Well, I think on this discussion, we've got, three great kind of potential models, from the, slow money, Jessica talked a little bit about, to CDFIs, to Dawn, what you're doing with this is a sustainable venture fund. I think, communities need to kind of figure out what really resonates with them and what their need is there. And then, as Jessica said, ask for help. There's a ton of people in each of those spaces that can help you get started. And get started. Try to start small yourself if you want to do that, or you can also explore in some of these areas like partnerships, where there may be someone who serves very close to you. You can just help make a case for them to help serve and get something going in your area as well. So that's always an opportunity.
Yeah. Great. And I would just close with, there's a whole world out there. This field has really advanced in the 25 years I've been a part of it. This is my 4th impact fund. When I started, no one knew what an impact fund even was. So there's a lot of forms, there's a lot of methodology, there's a lot of learning that exists out in the, interwebs and within the people. And I agree with what Jessica and Matt both said. People are willing to help you. So reach out, make a personal connection and a relationship, ask for the forms you need, ask for the help you need, and, stick with it. It takes a lot longer than you think it might, but the journey is totally worth it. So Andrew, we're going to go back to you for closing, I think.
Yes, thank you very much, Dawn, and many thanks also to Jessica and Matt. Thank all three of you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. That was a really wonderful conversation, and it will definitely be helpful for those looking to catalyze localist action in their places. Once again, for more information on this and other local ecosystem models, be sure to visit the BALLE 101 Toolkit at the BALLE website, www.bealocalist.org. Have a great day. Thanks again to everyone, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Matt. Bye-bye. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks, Dawn.